Every month we get our data in Excel workbooks. Some of the tables are a proper data set. Other tables come with completely blank columns. And still others come with completely blank rows. The goal is to take the first table, which is perfect, then take the second table, remove the columns, the third table, remove the rows, and then take all three tables and append them into a single table. Now this comment comes from Jim, and he says, the customer generally provides the spec data in the same format, except that sometimes they insert blank columns between data columns and blank rows between data rows. And there's lots of files. I made these files here, and you can download the Excel files folder to follow along. If we look inside, for example, Portland, every workbook has exactly one sheet and no other objects. Knowing that will make the import a little bit easier. We also want to notice that the customer, or in this case, city name, comes in the Excel file name. And we'll need that city information in a column in our final table. And because we're importing data, and there may be lots of files, we're not doing it manually. We're going to do it with Power Query. And we're going to build a custom function. Now, the beauty of a custom function is when we import and get a column with all of our tables from all the Excel files, we simply build a custom function, add it to a custom column, and it will transform each table before we do our append. Now, before we see two different ways to create our custom function, we need to go to the Data Ribbon tab, Get and Transform Group, Get Data dropdown from File and over to From Folder. Now we browse, and very carefully inside of Excel files, we're going to point to Start. That Start folder has 3 Excel files, each with a single worksheet of data. Click OK. OK. And now we click Transform Data. We're going to name our new query, and then Enter. Now over in the Content column, we have a column of Excel files. We have the name and some other file attributes. The first thing we want to do is remove .xlsx, because we want the name of each city to appear in the final data set. So I select the column. In the Home Ribbon tab over in Transform, we can click Replace Values. Value to find .xlsx. We can leave that blank. Click OK. Now I want Content, and holding Shift the Name column, we right-click, Remove Other Columns. Now, because this is an Excel file, we need to extract all of the objects. And the way we do that in Power Query is to add a new column, Custom Column button. We're going to call this Get Excel Sheet. And the Power Query function we use to get Excel objects from an Excel file, Excel.Workbook, all correct capitalization, open parentheses. The content column has the Excel file. And for this first example, we're not going to use the second argument to promote headers, because the transformation we're going to make requires that the headers are in the first row. So I simply close parentheses. Excel.Workbook, when I click OK, delivers a new column. And for each Excel file and each Excel row, we get a table that lists all of the objects. Now, all these Excel files have only one object, and it's the data column that contains the object. The remaining columns, like name and what kind of objects, are attributes for that object. The second row, well, it only has one object. There's that sheet of data. Same with all of the files we're going to get. So what we really want, instead of a table in each row showing us objects and attributes, I just want the actual table. That means Excel.Workbook Function is delivering a table. And from that table, I need to do a two-way lookup to get the first record and the item from the data column. So we come up to our formula bar. And after Excel.CurrentWorkbook, which is a table, we use our positional index operators. Power Query is base 0, so if I type a 0 inside those curly brackets, now I'm telling the table that's delivered to only give me the first record. I hit Enter. Now we can see for each row we have a record, and we want the sheet of data from that data column. So after the positional index operators, we use our field access operator, square brackets, and then the name of the column, and Enter. And now from the table, we've extracted the first row and the item from the data column. So now we see the actual sheet in each row for each Excel file. Now the next step is we're going to create a custom function to remove all the columns with nulls and rows with nulls. And we'll do it two ways. One using mostly the user interface, and then the second custom function we'll type out from scratch. Now if we're going to build a custom function to work on each one of these tables, I need a sample table to build the code and then convert it to a custom function. Normally, I come over here and import one file and build the code, but watch this, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to add some extra code down to the applied steps, copy and paste it into a custom function, and then come over and delete those unnecessary steps. Now, anytime we have an object like a table, normally we don't want to click on it because it will extract it. But here, that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to click on table. It adds this extra step with just that one file. The concept we're going to use is over in home, we're going to use remove rows, blank rows. Then we'll transpose the table so columns become rows, and we'll do that exact same thing. So step one, and we'll see that the code will appear down here. Remove rows, remove blank rows. Now over in transform, we'll use transpose. Now we have our columns as rows, so we go back to home, remove rows, blank rows. Go back to transform, transpose, and then promote headers. Now I want to rename these steps. And we don't need change type, but starting with remove blank rows, F2, and I'm going to rename this remove blank rows 1. And I did this for each step because the code, when we look in Advanced Editor, is much neater when we don't have any spaces. Now to steal the code, we'll go up to Home, Advanced Editor, and the code we're going to steal are those 5 lines. Control-C, cancel. Now over here on the left, right-click, New Query, Other, Blank Query, click Advanced Editor, and I'll highlight that first step, Control-V, double-click the last step name, Control-C, and we'll paste it at the end. Now the let statement allows us to define variables. Those are our steps. This is the name of the first variable. Then there's an equal sign, and then the M code. Very importantly, after each variable or applied step, there's a comma. This comma means please evaluate this to a value and make it available for us to use later. For example, step 1 name is going to be used in the second step. After each variable or step, we list a comma. When we get to the last step, we do not put a comma. After the in, we put whatever we want this full let statement expression to deliver. Most of the time, what we want to deliver is the last step. Now, in order to use this in that column, we need to get the first argument of the first function in the first step to see the column with the tables. So we come up to the top, and in parentheses, we can define a variable for our new custom function. We'll call it table. And we will define it as a table type. Outside the parentheses, in order for this to be a function, we have to use the Goto Operator, equal sign, greater than. That Goto Operator says, here's the variable, and here's the mapping for that variable. For us, the column with our sheets of data will be our input for this table variable. Now we click Done. Now we see our new function. F2 to rename it. Call it something like remove blank rows and columns. Now we go back to our first query, and over in applied steps, I want to right-click Get Excel Sheet, delete until end. We come up to Add Column. Invoke Custom Function, the name of the new column, Final Table, and from our dropdown, there's our function. Now it wants to know for that variable table, what do you want as an input? Well, we want a column name because that column for each row has the sheet. So we say, please use Get Excel Sheet. Now I can click OK. And you got to be kidding me. Look at that. Each row has a proper data set that we can now append. Now I want to select Final Table and holding Control, the name column, right-click, Remove Other Columns. Now we can use our Expand button, and it will take all those tables with this name column and append them. So I'm going to uncheck Use Original, click OK. There's our table. We can see up in the formula bar, notice it hard-coded the field names in. The next custom function we build from scratch will see a different way to append the tables. But now we need to change the data type. So I click the data type icon, date. Data type, I'm going to call this decimal. Later we'll get some decimal amounts. And then for the last two columns, holding Shift and selecting both, right-click, change type, down to text. And now we can go up to Close and Load to. I want it as a table on the existing sheet, 1660, cell A1, click OK. And now we have our query that loads the table and one Power Query custom function. Now we want to go and see how to do this a different way. I'll double-click the query to open up the Power Query window. Over on the left, I'm going to open up the Queries pane. And I want to duplicate this first query. Right-click, Duplicate, F2, and I'll just change this to O2. Over in Applied Steps, Invoke Custom Function. Right-click, Delete until End. Delete. Now for added custom, if we go up to the formula bar, remember we used Excel.Workbook and we did not want to promote headers. But in this next solution, we want to promote headers. So inside of Excel.CurrentWorkbook, we type a comma to get to our second argument. And if you type little true, that means please take the first row and promote them to field names or headers. I'm going to click at the end and enter. Now we can see instead of field names in the first row, they're promoted. Now we still have the problem. We have null rows and columns with nulls. Well, here's the approach. And guess what? I learned this solution from Bill Sizes. And he said, hey, rather than checking all of the nulls and all the columns and rows, why don't we do this? 2 steps. We'll extract just the column names and only select table columns that don't start with the text column. And then, rather than checking all the rows for nulls, we'll extract the date column and just look at the nulls in the date column. In this way, the function will have fewer cells to look through. Now, we're dealing with a small data set, but I created a data set that had 4 million rows. And in fact, this function we're going to see here was 25% faster. Now, we're going to build this from scratch. So we come over to the gray, right-click, New Query, down to Other Sources, and Blank Query. Over here, F2, something like Select Columns or Remove Blanks in Date. Now we come up to the Advanced Editor, and we're actually going to see a great trick when you're typing out M code from scratch that will allow us to visualize each step. Now, one of the problems ultimately with M code and DAX formulas in the data model is it's hard to visualize. In Excel, we have the F9 key to evaluate each part of the formula. But we're going to see a great trick here that will allow us to visualize each step. Now, at the top, I'm going to hit Enter. And in parentheses, the variables for our custom function will be table as table. And we're going to need to get the name of each city from the name column. So we'll have a variable called city as text. And then we'll have our Goto Operator. And the very first step is going to be called select column equal sign. And we're going to have this as our last step for now. The goal of the first formula element is to extract the column names from each table in each row. So we use the Power Query function table.columnNames. Open parentheses, and our variable will be table. Now here's the crazy thing. If we spell this right, that's the only bit of code I'm going to write so far. I'm going to go run this custom function on that table and see if in that column we can see that our code is working and that we have all of the column names. I'm going to click Done. Oh, look at that. It's so polite. Better put an X here and Enter. Now we come over here. We have Added Custom Column. We go up to Add Column. Invoke Custom Function. We'll call this Final Table. And we'll use our new function. The table variable is going to come from a column name. That will be Get Excel Sheet. The variable city will come from a column, and that will be name. We're connecting the variables in our function to the columns in the table. Click OK. And now look at that. Here's our list. And sure enough, in the last one, we can see we do have column. Now, since this is a list, our next step is to select from the list columns that are not starting with the text column. Right-click our function, Advanced Editor. And then in our first step, we'll use list.select. That's going to require a list. And there's our list of field names, comma. This is a function, so we have to use, or we're going to use the keyword each. And we want to say text.startsWith. And the first argument in text.startsWith needs some text. Since that's a list, we use underscore. When we use each, we can access each row and whatever this is here with an underscore. Since the list contains text column names, that's perfect. Comma. And we're looking for, in double quotes, column. Now, that word column is automatically generated because inside that Excel sheet, when we had a blank column, there was no field name. So it gets assigned automatically. Now, that's not quite what we want because what do we want? Not starting with columns. So we use the keyword not. Now, close parentheses. And now when we go look at our function, we better get a list without the columns that start with column. Done. We look over here at our list. And sure enough, the last one, there it is. That's pretty cool. We can go back and forth as we build our custom function and see what it's evaluating to. Now we want to use this list to only select the correct columns in the full table. So now we use table.selectColumns tab. The first argument is our variable table. And comma, there is our list. We come to the end. Done. And there are our tables. And look at that. The last table that had those empty columns, now they're not there. Now our next step is to select the rows that are not null. And we're going to do it just on the date column. Now we need a comma, enter, and a new variable. I'm going to call it select rows. And we'll double click, copy, and paste this down here. Table dot, and this time we'll use select rows. And we need the name of the previous step, Control C. That is our table, comma. And now we need a function. We'll use each. And I want to look through not the entire record, which would be like that. I want just the field from a record. So in this case, we use record.field. That means from the record, we'll extract a field. There's the full record. Since that underscore is working with each, it's looking at a table, so it's going to extract the entire record, comma. And we want the record called date. Now we're hard coding that in, and for the time being, that will work. Now that's just extracting the one cell in the date column, and we need to ask, are you not equal to null? And that will do it when I close parentheses. No comma, because the last line doesn't have a comma, and you repeat the last step. Done. And you've got to be kidding me. Look at that. It has removed the null rows. If we didn't want to hard code that, well, we'll come up to the first step, enter, and we'll add a new step, something like first column name. And we need all the column names again, so we use table.columnNames, open parentheses. We need the name of the previous step. And we know that table.columnNames delivers a list of field names, and all we want is the first one. So we use our positional index operator on that list. When I say 0, that means give me the first column name for each table. Now we want a comma, and I want to show you something really cool. I want to see what this delivers, and we want to see that the let really does just define variables. We can paste any variable or anything we want after the in, and that's what this custom function let statement will deliver. And sure enough, there it is, the first field name in each row. Because the next step here is looking at select columns, which it should be, but now I just want to use this variable here. And then we want to deliver the last step after in, and click Done. And there, that is working. Now the last thing we need to do is bring in an extra column that extracts the city name. So up in Advanced Editor, comma. We'll have our variable, and we'll use table.add column, comma. We need the new name of the column, so in double quotes, city name. And then we need a function, and we'll use each. And here's where we use our variable, city. So that will work. Our last step, we'll copy, paste it here, and there's our custom function. I guess I better put a lowercase a. Done. When I go back over here, there are all of our tables we can now append. Now this is the only column we need, so right-click, remove other columns. This is a column with tables, and we want to use table.combine to append all of these. But this needs to be a list, so we come up to f of x to add a step. And we can extract from a table using our field access operator the column name and enter. There's our list of tables. So now after the equal sign, table.combine. And this will combine those tables without hard coding the field names in. And now when I hit enter, that is amazing. We'll add a final data type here, text. Those are the steps. Come up to close and load 2 on the existing sheet. I'm going to put it in G1, click OK. And there we loaded our data. Now if we add a new file, Control-C, Control-V, and in the Data Ribbon tab, click Refresh All. Everything updates. And there we have taken multiple tables from different Excel files with blank columns and blank rows and built 2 different custom functions to append them into a single table. All right, thanks to Bill Scissors for some cool code. And of course, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. And if you want to learn more about M code, check out my free YouTube class, MSPTDA.